Iraq kulisanko kuma chiberipo apempere akiganga dikuti sana pake kana apempere zikanga dikuti pale chachitika ndikona mavuno afunika kupembera pake za manyomu.
Iraqis marched to parliament tonight, pulling down cement blast walls at the gate of Baghdad's heavily fortified green zone, home to government buildings and foreign embassies. They faced water cannon. But once inside, the water was handed out and they faced little opposition. Iraq hasn't had a head of state for 290 days, and many are fed up. There's no cabinet, no budget, no politicians, just protesters in the briefing room. And live streaming of tonight's parliamentary proceedings. They're chanting against the selection of a nominee for Prime Minister by Iran-backed parties, Mohammed al-Sudani. He would lead a coalition led by Iran-backed Shiite parties and their allies. Mostly followers of the popular Shia leader Muqtada al-Sadr, he has the power to mobilize the masses. His political rivals have probably heard the message. And it's not the first time his followers have stormed the green zone. Forming an Iraqi government often takes months and requires the buy-in of all the main political parties. But a new unwelcome record was set today, making this the longest post-election deadlock. Infighting among Shiite and Kurdish groups are a big part of the hold-up. The caretaker Prime Minister has called for calm, but this is an implicit warning of a potential escalation to come.
Iraq's political atmosphere is in crisis and the parliament is in limbo. That is after a disagreement between rival politicians has reached an intense point. Supporters of Shia cleric and influential political leader Muqtada Sadr have occupied the headquarters of the parliament, and they say they will not leave until their demands are met. Their demands include that the parliament reject the nomination of Mohammed Shia Sudani for prime minister. Sudani was nominated by the rival pro-Iranian parliamentary bloc, the coordination framework. The crisis started in June when 73 lawmakers affiliated to Muqtada Sadr quitted the parliament after the parliament failed more than once to elect a new president of the state or to elect a new prime minister to form a new government. Assad and his affiliates want to form a majority government by the majority of the lawmakers. They say they had the largest bloc in the parliament, so that in their words gives them the right to form a new government with their Sunni and Kurdish allies. On the other hand, the coordination framework lawmakers say that a new consensus government should be formed in order to include all the various parliamentary blocs. Now, the problem continued and the supporters of al-Sadr are in control of the parliament. Many state institutions are not functioning, and Sadr himself in a recent televised statement has commanded his supporters to continue their sit-in in the parliament until their demands are met. He has also suggested that the parliament be dissolved and new or fresh legislative elections be held in order to solve this impasse. The current standoff has severely impacted the lives of civilians. People in the streets have been complaining of that political deadlock. They have been relying on a to-be-formed new government to handle the multiple crises and to address the needs of the civilians. But there has been disillusionment, there has been frustration among civilians due to the current political deadlock.
You're live with Lucy Hawkins. To Iraq now, where the influential Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr has called on his supporters to stop ongoing demonstrations after they stormed the country's parliament building. Police fired tear gas and used water cannons as hundreds of protesters breached a high-security zone in Baghdad. Let's go live there now. We can speak to the BBC's Faraz Kalani, who is there. Faraz, just take us through exactly what happened. The pictures are so dramatic and it seems incredibly chaotic.
It was actually yesterday at 4 o'clock local time, thousands, actually not hundreds, of the Iraqi Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr start gathering in the middle of Baghdad, and then they moved directly to the green zone. The first few minutes, the security forces, they really tried to stop them, but then it was weird how the security forces opened the gates to and let them enter the green zone, where, as you know, the embassies, the politicians, they are based there, and live there. And then they moved towards the parliament. They stormed there, and they spent like 2 hours before they left it. After Muqtada al-Sadr asked them to do so on Twitter. They were organized, to be honest. They didn't try to do anything wrong. They just wanted to deliver this message that we can do that at any minute. If the other Shia parties insisted in nominating any person to form the new government without the permission or the acceptance from Muqtada al-Sadr, and this is what happened 2 days ago. As you know, the Shia parties backed by Iran nominated Mohammed Shaya al-Sudani, a guy who is well known of being a strong ally to the ex-Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, and because of that, it was the message that we will not allow this guy to form the government.
Faraz, thank you so much for that update live in Baghdad for us.
Protesters and counter-protesters. Supporters of Iraq's coordination framework gathered near Baghdad's green zone. They're denouncing what they consider a coup by rival Shia leader Muqtada al-Sadr and his followers.
We are
here to regain the legitimacy of the state institutions that has been violated by the occupation of the parliament at the hands of the Sadrists. We try to keep it peaceful.
But violence erupted as they headed towards the green zone, forcing security personnel to pull out. Chanting against caretaker Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi, they accuse him of collaborating with al-Sadr to remain in power.
There are reports of military units within rival factions being deployed nearby to protect their people, so many fear it could get worse. Opposing groups have been intensifying their campaigns and seem to be pushing for a showdown.
Since Saturday, al-Sadr supporters have staged a sit-in at the parliament building. Hadi al-Amri, a top leader with the coordination framework, has warned of bloodshed and called for dialogue. This escalation comes against the backdrop of leaked audio recordings attributed to former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, where he is heard insulting al-Sadr and his affiliates. The Sadrists have requested that al-Maliki recordings be condemned as a prerequisite for dialogue.
We will remain here until our leader instructs us to leave. It's not just a political dispute, it's rather a revolution against decades of corruption and oppression.
The conflict over forming a government started here among lawmakers months ago. But these protesters say they not only follow their leaders, but they also want to change the whole political system. Mahmoud Abdul Wahid, Al Jazeera, Baghdad.
A political crisis in Iraq has erupted into violence after the powerful Shiite leader Muqtada al-Sadr announced he was quitting frontline politics. Gunfire and explosions have rocked Baghdad's high-security green zone in the past few hours, with reports of heavy fighting between rival Shiite factions. At least 20 people have been killed and hundreds injured in the worst fighting the Iraqi capital has seen in years. Victoria Gatenby begins our coverage.
Chaos in Baghdad's heavily fortified green zone. rival Shiite factions targeting each other. The fighting escalated late on Monday night after a day of violence and political turmoil. Protests broke out after Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr announced he was quitting frontline politics. His supporters broke into the presidential palace, which houses the Prime Minister's office, many even taking to the palace pool.
Our demands are to dissolve parliament and to hold the corrupt to account. And we say, my master, Muqtada al-Sadr, their pride is under your feet, and we will sacrifice for you. Victory is ours.
Caretaker Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi halted cabinet sessions until further notice. But Iraq's political life was already in limbo. There's been deadlock for almost a year, since Muqtada al-Sadr's party won the largest share of seats in elections last October. It wasn't enough to secure a majority, and Sadr hasn't been able to form a government of his choosing. He told his MPs to resign in June, and his supporters have been protesting since July. Some even briefly occupied parliament. They want new elections without the participation of Iran-backed groups.
This is an Iraqi revolution. Iraq should be returned to its people.
This is not the first time Sadr's announced his retirement from politics, and many have dismissed it as a bluff to gain leverage over his rivals. Already, several protesters have been killed and hundreds wounded. And it's feared Sadr's latest move could lead to yet more instability. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera.
Well, our correspondent Mahmoud Abdul Wahid is in Baghdad.
We're now very close to the green zone where the clashes is continuing between armed brigades affiliated to Muqtada al-Sadr on the one hand, and on the other hand military units. They say the Sadr supporters say that the armed groups shooting at them are affiliated to the Popular Mobilization Forces. We cannot independently verify that, but we know for certain that caretaker Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi earlier warned security forces not to use live bullets against protesters. There have been sniper shots coming from on top of the building. You've just heard this explosion. We've been hearing explosions, several explosions. Many people here say that probably mortar rockets or rocket-propelled grenades fired in the area, in and around the green zone. The situation remains very tense. As you know, that it's ironic because the green zone, which is a battlefield now between the rival factions, has been the heavily fortified area that is home to government offices and international diplomatic missions, including the US Embassy and the Embassy of the UK.
Well, Al Jazeera's Dorsa Jabari is in Tehran with more on how the Iranian government is reacting to the violence in Baghdad.
Well, we've heard from officials in Iran who have advised their citizens not to travel to Iraq. They have also canceled all flights to Iraq as a result of the instability that is ongoing in that country. There's a travel advisory for all Iranian citizens to avoid travel to the country. They have also closed all the land border crossings between Iraq and Iran. Of course, the two countries are neighbors and they share a very long border that stretches about 1,300 kilometers. We also heard from the Foreign Ministry spokesperson a little earlier this evening, and he said that the Iranian government believes that there's no political impasse, that Iraq can't solve itself, and that the Iranians are recommending that Iraq pursue a solution to political misunderstandings that they're having based on its constitution, which is interesting, of course, because one of the main issues that is at the core of the dispute between Muqtada al-Sadr's supporters and the government is the constitution itself and the laws that have been put in place about the system of government that they have.
Well, Muqtada al-Sadr has been a crucial figure in Iraqi politics for a long time. The Shiite leader's Sadrist movement is one of the most powerful factions. He rose to prominence after the end of Saddam Hussein's leadership in 2003. He's demanded the departure of American troops and is against Iran's influence. His movement secured the top position after parliamentary elections in October last year, winning 73 seats, but neither he nor his rivals had enough seats for a majority. After months of failing to form a government, Sadr ordered his MPs to resign in June, and his supporters have protested in central Baghdad since July, briefly occupying Parliament. Albert Wolf is a research associate at Johns Hopkins University. He isn't shocked by Sadr's announcement.
Frankly, I think this is Sadr being Sadr. I do believe that this is, I wouldn't call it a stunt per se, but I do believe that he's jockeying for leverage in this current political crisis. The past two elections have yielded the same exact results. He is not, and one of the things that's pushing him is that he has not been able to get a prime minister of his choosing. The coordination, one of the things that he demanded was that the coordination framework nominate someone who was, quote unquote, independent from Nouri al-Maliki. That's one thing that's pushed this. And the second thing is that, he's resisting of, U.S. and Iranian influence. So these are a couple of the things that are pushing this. But these are tactics that Sadr has used since 2003. Well, I don't believe that he's retiring from politics, and I don't believe anybody else believes that either. He's also said he's going on a hunger strike. Sadr is one of the few, if not the only figure in the Iraqi public sphere who could summon hundreds of thousands of people onto the streets, literally. So I think that you're in for, as you mentioned in your question, another election. I think that the election will probably result in a very similar result as the last two elections, and probably with low voter turnout, if not lower voter turnout than the last two.